This is Matthew Cratter from Trader University, and today I want to talk about how some politicians got together, punched Bitcoin in the mouth, and Bitcoin still went up. I'm talking about the infrastructure bill that's been working its way through the U.S. Senate. What happened, just a really quick recap, is that some people who had been paid off by the banking industry, some politicians, added some language deep within this infrastructure bill. And this bill was meant to fix bridges, highways, this sort of thing, the actual physical infrastructure. But of course, it got loaded up with pork and special interest language as well. Someone stuck some language in there that redefined broker in such a way as to ensnare Bitcoin miners, software developers, even other cryptocurrency consensus mechanisms like proof of stake validators, etc. Now, the problem with being a broker or being labeled a broker under U.S. law is that you're required by the IRS, our tax authority, to provide 1099 tax forms to your customers. And this makes sense if you trade with Schwab or Webull or Robinhood or some company like this. At the end of the year, you get a 1099 that shows your trading activity, and this is furnished to you, and it's also provided to the IRS. This is how it works in the U.S. But the crazy thing about this new language in the infrastructure bill is that it would ensnare groups like Bitcoin miners. So how could a Bitcoin miner provide a 1099 to its quote-unquote customers when it doesn't even know the real-world identity of those whose transactions are being included in a block that's being mined by a particular Bitcoin miner? This was clearly meant as a direct attack on Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. Language was clearly added at the behest of banking lobbyists and almost certainly Janet Yellen as well. Now, the problem with this bill is if it becomes law, and if that law is enforced and upheld by the courts, groups like Bitcoin miners would be forced out of the U.S. They wouldn't be able to be tax compliant, and so they would just have to pack up their bags and leave. This would be a huge geopolitical error on the U.S.'s part. We are benefiting from the fact that China was stupid enough to kick out all the Bitcoin miners. And we don't want something like this to happen here. Now, this is still just a bill that was passed by the Senate. It still needs to make its way to the House of Representatives and be signed by the president. If it were to become law, though, it would be even worse for other decentralized, other cryptocurrencies like Ethereum and Cardano and Ripple, which are much, much less decentralized. And the very easy way to see this, it's much easier to put Vitalik and Charles Hoskinson into jail than Satoshi, especially when no one knows who Satoshi is. So there was an amendment to this bill that was put forth by some very smart senators, including Senator Cynthia Lummis of Wyoming, who's very pro-Bitcoin. This we'll just call the Lummis Amendment. They started adding more and more senators' names to it, but it was originally Wyden Lummis and Toomey Amendment. And this was about to be added to the bill and approved until this character decided to act up. This is Richard Shelby, a senator from Alabama, who's been in the U.S. Senate since 1886. Well, he looks like he's been in the U.S. Senate since 1886. It's actually 1986. So he's been there forever. And so what he decided to do, he happens to be on the U.S. Senate Banking Committee. We can see his name right down here. He has also received multiple contributions from big banks, J.P. Morgan, Citigroup, Goldman Sachs, Travelers, MBNA, etc. And so this guy, who's managed to accumulate a net worth close to $20 million on an annual salary of $174,000 a year. So he's obviously a brilliant investor as well, or he's just someone who has benefited by being a corrupt politician who's in the back pocket of the banking industry. Anyway, Mr. Shelby decided to vote against this amendment, the Lummis Amendment. This amendment needed unanimous approval from all 100 senators to be added to the bill. 99 of them voted in favor of the amendment. Only Richard Shelby, who's paid off by bankers, he basically put up resistance saying, well, you got to approve my $50 billion defense spending amendment or I won't vote for your crypto Bitcoin amendment. People didn't want to vote for his spending amendment. And so he voted against the Lummis Amendment. 99 senators voted in favor of it because it's very reasonable. Shelby voted against it. By complete coincidence, of course, Shelby is retiring after this year. He's not up for re-election. So here's clearly an old guy. He's 87 years old. He's not going to have to face re-election, and they decided to let him take the fall for this. So unfortunately now, this very poorly written infrastructure bill now heads to the House of Representatives with this original anti-Bitcoin language intact. What happens next we're going to talk about, but first I'd ask you, if you're enjoying this video and finding it helpful, be sure to hit that subscribe and like button. Also share the video with a few friends. So the bill has been passed by the Senate with the original terrible language inside of it. It's now going to head to the House. The House of Representatives reconvenes on September 20th. And what they're going to need to do, and what we need to do, is put pressure on them to create a new amendment that would fix this broken broker language in the Senate's version of the bill. Again, this has nothing to do with Bitcoiners or the cryptocurrency industry trying to avoid paying taxes. What it has to do with is the fact that there's language in there that will force actors like Bitcoin miners to do something which they cannot do. They are unable to issue 1099s. They wouldn't even know the name of the person or the address to send it to. Meanwhile, centralized exchanges like Coinbase, Kraken, Gemini, these exchanges have been issuing 1099s for years. They will continue to issue them. And when you sell your Bitcoin in the US, all of this is being tracked. You will pay taxes on it or you'll be in trouble. So this really isn't about tax avoidance. This is about a hidden language in the bill that's trying to hamstring Bitcoin and the nascent cryptocurrency industry. Jerry Brito, who is the executive director of Coin Center, which has really been leading the fight and trying to educate politicians about how these things work, he confirms that all that's needed is to make sure that centralized exchanges like Coinbase are brokers for tax reporting purposes, and they don't need to expand the definition of broker when this makes it to the House of Representatives. You just add digital assets to what's already covered in the code, and then companies like Coinbase will continue to issue 1099. So the fix is very easy if the politicians are willing to do it. Now, even if this bill does become law, if it's some version of it is passed by the House of Representatives and signed by President Biden, this crazy definition of broker will almost certainly be contested and probably overturned by the courts in the US. Now, to be clear, nothing can stop Bitcoin. The real danger here, though, is that the US hurts itself in its future prospects if it decides to fight Bitcoin. You can fight Bitcoin, but you will eventually lose. And if you fight Bitcoin, whether you're an individual or you're a country, you put yourself at a huge disadvantage because you are fighting a software protocol that's completely decentralized, that's the hardest form of money ever created. And Bitcoin is going to win. There's no way to stop it. It's like a money virus that cannot be stopped. And there's no vaccine. All the fiat vaccines are going to be unable to stop it. You can even look at all the critics of Bitcoin on my channel. You can go back and read the comments over the last 12 to 18 months. All of their attacks, all of their FUD has been repeatedly been proven wrong. And as a result, if they're no coiners, if they're short Bitcoin, if they don't own Bitcoin, their net worths are massively diverging from those of you who do hold Bitcoin. Bitcoiners are getting more rich, more powerful, and people who oppose Bitcoin are getting more poor and less powerful. If the US drives out the nascent Bitcoin and cryptocurrency industry, again, I only care about Bitcoin. I don't care what happens to these other currencies, and they're going to lose the race anyway. I would prefer, though, to have the free markets decide this rather than some octogenarian politicians. But if the US succeeds in driving out this nascent industry, it's making a huge mistake. It's just a great way to drive the industry to competitor nations and thus strengthen them. If I were running the US, if I were running the Fed, I would use our money printers and the exorbitant privilege of having the global reserve currency. I would use this ability to print our own money, to print a lot of money, and instead of wasting it, I would use it to buy every last Bitcoin. And this would give the US a almost permanent technological and monetary and economic advantage. This bill, the infrastructure bill, all the debate around it, all the hoopla really shows how completely broken the system is. You have this anti-Bitcoin language that's buried deep inside a 2,700-page infrastructure bill that no human being can read this. The bill was written and crafted behind closed doors. There was no input from actual people who understand Bitcoin. And then the amendment to the bill, a very smart amendment by people like Cynthia Lummis, was killed by this 87-year-old dinosaur who'd been paid off by the banking industry. If you don't know why we need Bitcoin, or if you didn't understand why we need Bitcoin before, maybe this will help you to understand it, that this system is completely broken. And if the founding fathers could see it, they would be completely horrified. Meanwhile, there are estimates that now 46 million, I believe they're about 350 million Americans, 46 million Americans now own at least a little bit of Bitcoin. This is a growing bloc. I have a message to politicians from both sides of the aisle. Ignore the Bitcoin bloc at your own risk. Bitcoiners tend to be a very high IQ group of people. They are either already wealthy or about to become very wealthy as Bitcoin goes to 200,000 later this year, then 500,000, and then 1 million, and then 2 million per Bitcoin. Even people who own fractional Bitcoin will become very wealthy. Bitcoiners tend to be very independent thinkers. They tend to have low time preference. They play the long game. And they also have very, very long memories. I will never forget the people, the senators who made trouble with this bill. A lot of Bitcoiners are one-issue voters. And if you attack Bitcoin, these Bitcoiners will throw you out of office. Whether you're a Democrat or you're a Republican, it doesn't really matter. If we cannot fix the money, if we have the central bankers and the investment bankers continuing to run things, we have cantillionaires running things, this is a problem that is causing lots of other social ills, wealth inequality, etc. And so if you fix the money, you can fix the world. Bitcoiners understand this, and they will be voting with this in mind. If you want to stay in office, you need to support Bitcoin or risk the ire of Bitcoiners. Meanwhile, it's important to point out that every time Bitcoin gets attacked, it really is free advertising for Bitcoin. The people who attack Bitcoin are almost always corrupt and repulsive people like Christine Lagarde, Janet Yellen, Steve Mnuchin, people on both sides of the aisle, on the right and the left. And I think something really important to notice throughout all of this is how strong the Bitcoin price action has been throughout this whole ordeal. Bitcoin has gotten stronger. As this bill has moved through the Senate, Bitcoin retook its 50-day moving average, and then yesterday it retook its 200-day moving average. And one of the things, if you've been trading or investing for a while, is you should know is that you got to pay attention to assets, stocks that are receiving bad news but are still rallying in spite of that bad news. What matters is not the news, but the reaction to the news. And the fact that Bitcoin has been so strong in the face of these evil politicians shows you how unstoppable Bitcoin is. And it's also very bullish for Bitcoin. If Bitcoin can rally under these conditions, it shows how strong the protocol continues to be and how strong adoption continues to be. If you found this video helpful, be sure to hit that subscribe and like button. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video. And let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.